let me just talk about how the sequence goes, right? First of all, we've had this big economic downturn, which is was reflected in the current fiscal year. The fiscal years run from July to June. So we're in the middle of what's called fiscal 2009. So fiscal 2009 revenues came in way below their expectations, way below what nobody was planning on this downturn. And so the result was that we had to make a bunch of cuts during the middle of the year. Massachusetts made deep cuts, not as deep as some other states. I mean, all the states are even worse off, but with the help of, we've gotten through that, or close to getting through, with the help of the federal government. So now what we're really talking about is decisions about the budget that's going to begin in July for the 12 months following July. So July 2009 through June 2010. That's what we call fiscal 2010. Now the planning for that year began back in December, when the governor's budget person, Leslie Kirwan, who's the Secretary of Administration of Finance, sat with the Chair of Ways and Means of the House and Chair of Ways and Means of the Senate and came up with what they call the consensus revenue projections. So they make the best guess they can after listening to economists as to how much money we will have in that coming fiscal year 2010. The guess they made was a little less than $30 billion, less in fact than we've had we thought we were going to have in fiscal 2009. And so the governor built a budget on that and submitted that budget. That budget included some new taxes. And then the House begins its budget process. And the House gathers input from the members. The House Ways and Means chair sits down with all the members of the House. But we all send letters and so forth as to what we think some of our key priorities are. And then they go off and do their work. And so we've all been waiting until last week when the House House Ways and Means Committee budget was released. So that was the big event that happened last week, was the release of that budget. So that reflects a lot of decisions about individual programs and also about sort of the framework. So let's talk about what are some of the major decisions that were made in the way they set that budget up. First of all, they set up no new taxes. There are no new taxes in the budget, so as a result, it's about $700 million less than the governor's budget, because the governor did assume some additional taxes. Second, no stabilization fund draws. I don't believe the governor drew on the stabilization fund either, so I think
you may have a little bit.
Yeah. So that was the main thing. The main difference between the House and the governor is no new taxes. Now, once we get through this budget, though, of course, the next thing is it's going to go over to the Senate. And by the way, when the Senate gets it, it's later in the process, so they're going to have the benefit of a lot more economic information. Right now, that House budget is still based on the revenue projections that were made back in December. Nobody's changed the framework. Nobody's changed the assumptions. Probably in April or so, after the April numbers come in, it's likely that there will be a reduction in the estimate of how much money we're going to have for fiscal 2010, which will mean that our budget is even that much was going to have to be reduced, or if there's going to be any kind of tax increase, it's going to have to be that much greater in order to balance the budget. So the House is looking at a budget that is a lean budget, but knowing that it is probably almost certainly not lean enough, that there's a gap that might be anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion that's going to open up when they re-estimate the revenues in a few weeks. So that's the sort of odd situation that we're in as the House, is sort of not knowing what the framework is and not knowing exactly how to how the process is going to play through. But let's talk about some of the interim decisions that have been made. One thing to say about first of all, there's of course a lot of cuts. I mean, the estimated gap is on the order of total gap in funding between what it would have taken to keep last year's budget going at the budget as we set it in motion about a year ago, to what we're looking at for 2010 is about $4 billion. So 4 out of 30. Almost 15%, almost 12, 13, 14, 15% cut off of last year's budget. So that's a very big cut in functionality. Some of that's being made back up by stimulus, but so about $1.5 billion out of stimulus. So you're still looking at about $2.5 billion worth of cuts. Almost a little less than 10% because of the stimulus. So now, so in that lean environment, one thing the Ways and Means Committee did, which I think is a good thing to be trying to do, which is they said, okay, we're going to leave more flexibility in the hands of the executive branch to make choices about how to spend the money. So there's basically no earmarks in this budget. A lot of line items come in with a lot of earmarks, typically, and we add those. We fight for those little things for our district or programs that we believe in. There are almost no earmarks in the House budget, and the signal is that as we go into the process next week, there'll be a lot of pushback if we're trying to offer for any particular earmarks for particular programs. The House budget also leaves some accounts consolidated. One of the ways the legislature controls and micromanages the executive branch is dumping, slicing the budget into very small pieces, so that and with limited transferability among accounts. The Ways and Means budget, even in the courts, which has typically historically been an area where the legislature has exercised a lot of control, they've left in some pretty broadly consolidated accounts. So I think there's a good faith recognition on the part of the Ways and Means Committee that we have to do business in a different way, given the squeeze that we're under.